Good morning. Good morning on this. Yeah, listen, after the weather stuff that we had this week, to go outside and be able to actually see clouds, that's a good morning.
Yeah.
That was some. Listen, as much as I love the orange and black, that weather this week was some scary shit.
It really was. I went out to one day for work, and it looked like I was like in a scene of like The Mandalorian. Like just absolute it looked like a desert. Like the clouds and that like pinkish orange tint. It was crazy.
The one day I'm walking the kids out of the building on Tuesday.
Mm-hmm.
And it felt like I was on the beach with that, with a sandstorm where I'm like just getting like hitting like the eyes and the mouth, and I'm like tasting smoke. I'm going, what the hell is going on? It was crazy. And then later on that day, maybe it was Wednesday morning, all this like the pictures that were really freaky were the pictures that came out of New York, where like the time lapse videos where it was like 10 o'clock and 3 o'clock, and it went from like perfectly normal morning to like end game scenes from the Avengers movies where like it's apocalyptic.
Yeah,
it was just crazy. And to know that stuff is coming from Canada, just wild stuff, man. But it's nice that it's kind of we're on the tail end of it. It's dissipated. Weather's beautiful. And Mark, yesterday was the last day of school for me.
Awesome.
So everything's hitting a little bit different.
The
coffee tastes a little better. The beverages are a little colder.
Yep.
The sleep feels a little bit better, man. It's just it's a good time to be alive.
Yeah.
But listen, we actually have some good hockey conversation, some good talking points. So let's start with the big move, right? The big move with the Flyers that comes down. The trade comes down for Provorov. Tell me about, and we can go over the trade details in a minute, but you wrote a great article for the Fired Up site.
Yep. Yeah, it was we were on I believe Mike Gilletta was also on the media call that Briere had for it. We had gotten a link sent out to us. And, one of the things Briere had discussed during that was that, like, the Flyers are very much open for business. And I think that this trade of Provorov really gave us, he wasted no time getting to work here. The cup's not even over. And, out goes like 25 minute a night defenseman who had kind of been a big part of what they've been doing prior. And, and the assets that came back, it was a pretty creative deal for a general manager that was making a deal for the first time.
I was for this to be his first kind of like toe in the water for manipulating trades.
Sure.
I was really impressed and kind of caught off guard. I kind of knew that there was probably going to be some of that stuff this offseason, but like to hit the ground running. And I think that based on the things that I've heard between him and Keith Jones, they seem to be kind of in lockstep with what needs to happen. And it's going to look very process-esque in terms of, stripping it all down. You're not losing on purpose, but you're going to pare the talent pool down so that you can really build this roster back up.
Yeah.
And I think this trade is, I hate to say it, but this trade is almost like a year late. Like
Right.
this kind of thing would have been the move to make, this time last year.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think with the amount of fanfare, around really, like, I mean, I know it's seen as the Connor Bedard draft, but I mean, Adam Vintilli's an outstanding young player. Leo
Yeah.
Carlson's an outstanding young player. The Matavi Michkov situation, if you take away that Russian conflict thing that exists around it, outstanding player, perhaps the highest
Right.
offensive player next to Bedard in the whole draft. It's
Right.
really, I think that has something to do with it as well. Like, the amount of, that it feels like it was a year too late. But I agree. I think like that it was nice to hear that was something Briere had discussed, that Dan Hilferty, who I believe is the like CEO, he's the bigwig above Keith Jones and all. Everybody was kind of in agreement that they were doing this. There was constant communication, it sounded like. And there wasn't always that, or at least it appeared to be that way prior.
Right.
It was a pretty significant trade for it to be his first trade. I mean, there was salary retention. It's a three-way team. It's a three-team trade. Like, it was pretty intricate for a first-time general manager, but he did a nice job. I mean, the Flyers got quite a few assets back there. So
I was gonna say to be able to manipulate this roster, they're gonna have to be creative because they've got some older players with some bigger salaries, salary numbers that like you're going to have to be creative like this in order to be able to get this team back on track. And I heard, and I don't remember who the interview was with, but Keith Jones was talking about the fact that he is leveraging his relationships around the league to be able to start to manipulate and maybe open doors for trades like this, where like, he's talking about having breakfast with Wayne Gretzky and, talking to some other guys around the league. And I think him being in the position that he's been in the last couple of years, doing the NHL broadcast, being in every city, making those connections with different front office people is now going to open a lot of doors and conversations that may not have been there had there been, just, run of the mill NHL front office guy.
Yeah. Jonesy's a really smart hockey guy.
He comes across like the whole WIP thing he comes across as like a goober.
Yeah.
But I think it's like he's the guy that's in in his basement, like just cooking up like mastermind stuff, but like doesn't ever want to tell you about it.
Yeah. He's got to be like a color commentator for as many years as he has been, and now he's doing, he's been doing the between the glass stuff for the national broadcast. He's you have to be a pretty articulate guy to do that. Like, I think Eddie Olczyk has always been a very great hockey 101 type of guy, like for a sport like hockey where it's kind of seen as like niche sometimes, and it's like you get these really like great colorful articulate guys to explain the game in layman's terms, so to speak. And it's I always think about like during the Stanley Cup final you'll hear or any national broadcast that Eddie Olczyk does, setting up a goal, the way he breaks down a play that leads to a goal. And you'll hear him say things like, oh, you move the puck, move yourself. Like, these are all kind of like 101 hockey term type of stuff, but he's really great at putting it in a way that's easily digestible. And I think Keith James is the same way.
You're right.
And he's done, he seems like a very good guy for that position just because he's so universally well liked. And, him and Briere, like the fact that him and Briere and even down to the coach and John Tortorella, who has been reported to say he's having somewhat of a significant say-so in what this roster looks like, both for now and the future. That's a good place to be because it didn't always feel like that. There felt like a heavy disconnect prior. So
yeah, I also think that there's a strong desire from the top down to maybe disconnect from the traditional Flyers
mm-hmm.
mucker grinder, like Broad Street Bullies, as much as that is a part of the rich history of this franchise. I think these two guys, they're in a place where they can acknowledge it, but
Mm-hmm.
not have to live by it. Where
Right.
they're gonna, they know that the opportunities for this franchise to move on are to get younger, faster, more athletic, because that's where this game has gone. And there's a place for those guys, but they shouldn't be the center of attention when you're building this roster.
No, no. And we haven't heard much since the reports that came out mid-season about like kind of like the old guard, the old regime guys, where they were going to be moved into, and maybe that's something that they're doing quietly, where they're just simply not getting as much say so or whatever. I kind of look at the Briere Keith Jones thing. There's parts of it that are similar to what they've done in the past, right? Keith Jones played here for a little while. Danny Briere played here for a little while. Mm-hmm. You could kind of categorize them as former Flyers, but it's former Flyers with a fresh coat of paint. It's a former Flyer thing that, these guys in Jonesy's case, he played, what's it been, 20 years? I can't remember how long ago it was. But
it's been a while, but his role still allowed him to be around the game.
Yeah, he had been around the game for a while. And then for Briere, I mean, Briere retired not all that long ago. I mean, he's not that far removed from being a part of the game. Like the game was already this open. He played in the NHL post lockout, 2005 lockout. So it's like,
okay.
Whereas like the game has undergone changes and things of that nature, but he was also, it's still closer to the game that's played today than it was, say 30, 35 years ago, 40 years ago. So
gotcha.
It's a very significantly different game, but Briere played in that. So I think his understanding, and then all the time on top of all that, he seems to be very well liked and respected. I think we've said these things on previous Drunk on Ice pods when he got hired, that, the Flyers sent, Comcast Spectacor sent Danny Briere to Warden to learn like the business
wow,
aspect of it.
That's like I totally forgot about that. That's like an underrated, like, we need you to have this like slight askew understanding of how this business way works.
Yeah, like just straight business, never mind hockey acumen. When you're around the game your whole life and you played at such a high level like Danny did, he already has that part, you know what I mean?
Right.
But they kind of brought him through the organization. Like it was kind of like he was being groomed for this type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it had been a while. So the fact that they sent him to school to kind of learn the actual business, he's the best of both worlds that way. And the fact that they're so comfortable with him is, I think, because he's been with the organization a while and he kind of has the best of both elements there. And this first trade of Provorov kind of proved that. Like we said, it was an intricate deal to pull off as your first one.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you give up, a guy that is and was, a cornerstone piece of what you thought was going to be a productive, run for this franchise. But I think that, now that you mentioned that, and now that I'm going back and looking at the trade, right, to be creative and to, include in the deal that, the Los Angeles Kings are going to retain, 30% of his salary. Like that's a way to kind of creatively manipulate this trade where, you don't normally see things like that included in a trade. So like to look at that from a different aspect, and then to look at the guys that they got back, right? You're talking about, they get 3 players, Cal Peterson, Sean Walker, and I'm going to butcher this guy's name 10 different times, but Helge Grans.
Yeah, that's
and
pretty
then
close.
okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure
and
either.
then, listen, I'm sure if people are calling the radio about him, I'm sure they're going to say it 63 different ways, and
Oh
it'll
yeah,
all be wrong.
you couldn't have done it. You couldn't do it any worse than what people are doing on the radio with it. Like, I'm sure.
But listen, and then they're going to get the first round pick, the 22nd overall pick from the Blue Jackets this year.
Yeah.
And then you're going to get next year's second round pick from the Kings.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have another conditional second round pick from the Blue Jackets.
Yeah.
Which are all you're stocking that cupboard full of assets that you're going to need. You're going to need in this rebuild to fire as many bullets as you possibly can to be able to get this rebuild back on track. And I think the sooner that people realize and wrap their heads around it, I think knowing as much as the Sixers didn't have a ton of success not being able to get out of the second round, they did a good job at retaining assets to be able to take a shot at different players, right? But
sure.
The one thing that I heard Keith Jones talk about is like, this is where the scouting department and their player development is going to be integral, because they're going to need to hit on guys that they pick late in drafts. They're going to need to hit on guys in player development. And he even spoke about himself.
Yeah.
Right. He wasn't like a top flight, top of the draft kind of guy. He was a guy that really needed the coaching and the player development early on to become a productive part of the an NHL team. So I think him speaking with that forethought gives me a lot of hope that like those guys are going to be in player development, and that player development has some kind of direction.
Yeah. And, when we look, like, when you get down to like the bare bones of the trade, one of the things that Briere said on that call, he was asked about Grans, the young prospect defenseman that they got. And he was asked if he had seen him play, and Briere said that he hadn't, that he was trusting his scouts on that. Right. And, again, coming off of, I don't know, there wasn't a whole lot reported about how Chuck Fletcher and Brett Flair ran things draft-wise. I think early returns on their drafts have been good. Talking about players like Gauthier and Cam York. York's already up with the big roster. So
I think Gauthier is a guy to watch towards the end of next season.
Yeah,
that could be something where they decide to make a move on that end. I was kind of surprised that he went back.
Right.
At the end of this year, I would have thought that would have been something that he would have seen enough production out of himself to be able to make that move. But maybe that could also be the franchise saying, "You're good. We know where you are. Just stay where you are and be productive."
He played for Team USA in the World Championship tournament postseason, and he was playing against a lot of pros in that tournament, and he was excellent. He was one of Team USA's best players. I think he was a point per game. I think he played at a point per game pace there. It's a summertime tournament and things like that, so you take it with a grain of salt. But it was against pros, and that's not insignificant. So he'll go back to college. He'll dominate probably, most likely, at BC, and then the Flyers will reassess. After. And he may be, at the end of next season, he may, end up getting a cup of coffee with the Flyers, and he'll be here, and he'll be under their tutelage and their watch from, then onward. But, like, I think with Briere and like the way he kind of described that about like putting trust in his scouts, I think if you go back, not the Fletcher regime, but the Hextall regime prior to that, I think Ron Hextall saw himself as more of a prospect guy because he had come from a player development aspect. So I don't know how much he was trusting the scouts, so to speak. He was he had his own vision. I think that's when you're in a position like general manager, I think one of your best assets has to be that you're listening to people around you. You have to
Yeah, I
trust the
think
people around you.
that's the thing that I think with these two guys heading this roster construction, that's the thing that I think is most in place, is
Yeah.
that they're most willing to listen, because and we can kind of touch base on a guy that for all intents and purposes was a building block of this franchise moving forward. But I did hear them talk about they have to be open to the opportunity to listen to deals for Carter Hart. And
Right.
that to me is a huge step forward, because as much as I love him and love the player that he is and the player that he could be, I don't know if it's going to line up with where this reconstruction and this rebuild is going to be when it's successful. So it's like that dichotomy, like trying to match the timing with like, okay, well, if we think we can turn this around in 3 to 5 years, his salary is obviously really low because he's on those entry level contracts. But by the time this team, like if it's 5 years from now,
yeah,
are you better off capitalizing on the fact that he's young, talented, under contract for what amounts in the NHL to very minimal salary?
Yeah.
And how much of an asset that could be and what you could get back and where that puts you in terms of how do you redesign this roster? Because Cal Peterson's on this team now. It does lend itself to saying we maybe, if we can, depending on the package that you can get back, where does that essentially put your franchise?
Right. And there's the Hart thing is, there's so many moving parts, elements to this that I think if I were the Flyers, just putting myself in their shoes, I'm kind of in a position where I would actually, they don't have to make a decision on Hart this year. They can bring him back, have him play this year, and reassess, because you can walk him up to, I believe next year is when he's owed the pay. He's going to get the raise. He's going to get the the bigger deal, bigger long-term deal.
Right.
You don't have to make that decision this year. And it's hard because he's 24 years old. And it's he could feasibly be a part of he could be one of the players on the roster that stays with the team through the process, that sees it out on the other side. And he has not scratched the surface on what he could be in front of a good team. Goaltending's tied to so many great so many things out of your control, how teams play in front of you. I always think about you see plays, you see the guys in front of you, and the team you're playing against is on a power play or something like that, and they're it's tic-tac-toe, and it's a backdoor pass, and the guy's wide open. I mean, if you're a goalie, you can't do anything about that. You know what I mean? No. You may go post to post, make a stellar save or something like that if you anticipate it, but it's sometimes, or most of the time rather, you can't do anything about those things. And Hart's played behind some really poor Flyers defensive teams. And
Mark, those are some extremely kind words.
Yeah, I'm extra kind today.
Oh my God, it's like the when you look at the guys that they put in front of him, it constantly put him at a disadvantage. And to look at his salary, he's making just under $4 million for this upcoming season. And then he's going to be a restricted free agent. So you're right. Like you walk him all the way up to the, and does that mean that you sign him? Is it a sign and trade? Is it
right?
It's just, it's so hard to look at, what I guess the the main sticking point is trying to figure out what's the return. What are you
Right.
going to get back?
And
Because
no, go ahead.
If it's and I heard somebody talking about I think it was Keith Jones talking about the talent pool that they have at that position in their farm system. They've got 3 or 4 really talented goalies in their minor league system right now and now you bring in Cal Petersen, it makes the opportunity to do that deal more palatable because you know that there's a softer landing spot.
Yes.
Because you're getting assets back. You have guys in your farm system that you can elevate. It just, I have to see what the return is. You have to see what when you're having those conversations, what are we talking about? Are we talking about a move that potentially, I heard someone just talking conversationally. Is it a move that puts you in the top 3 of this draft?
Right.
Like if that's a move, I'm okay with that because you can turn a guy who's an asset into a guy that could essentially be the cornerstone of your franchise for the next, decade.
Right. Yeah.
But
And that,
if it's got to be for piles of prospects, piles of picks. I would understand it, but I'm really hesitant.
Yeah. And I agree with that. I would feel the same way as well. That's kind of how I felt about the Provorov thing. I've always been a really ardent supporter of his game, and I think it's really tough when he's had a revolving door of partners and all those other things. He didn't get the best. It's ultimately on the player, but he didn't always get the best support system here either.
Right.
Kind of ditto, Carter Hart, and they're the same way with Hart. The thing about the return, potential return of trades, especially with goaltenders, they never truly match. You never really truly match the value of what you just moved. Historically, if you look at the way goaltenders have been, I think. And there's rumors and innuendo out there about like the Jets are exploring like trading Connor Hellebuyck, who's like one of the best goalies in the league that we don't talk enough about because he plays in Winnipeg. Right. I believe Nashville has kicked tires on UC Saros as a potential, them moving on from him. Mm-hmm. I feel like I'm missing someone. There's someone else. Gibson in Anaheim with the Ducks.
Yeah. Okay.
He's supposed to be out there as well. Like the market's also flooded in addition to, none of those
guys that are trying to move. Yeah.
Yeah. And those guys are legitimate starters. Now, none of them have, none of them are 24 years old like Carter Hart is. And you're looking at like young asset that could be a part of your solution for the next 5 to 10 years, whatever the case. Right. And the returns for goalies tend to be a little bit underwhelming historically, and it's a tough situation to be in because, like you said, they do the one thing the Flyers actually do have going for them is that the best part of their prospect pool right now is the goaltending. They have a ton of options. We saw last year, we saw Sam Ersson, who apparently the Flyers really, really like. Contribute. He had a cup of coffee with the pro team last year. There was times where he looked very, very good. Mm-hmm. Cal Petersen's coming in, and he was kind of the bigger, to facilitate a trade like they had to facilitate with Provorov. He had to take back a bad contract, and Cal Petersen's probably that.
Right.
And
he's got, and I'm just looking at that contract right now as you're talking. So he's going to make $5 the next 2 years.
Yeah. And that's difficult to swallow when he played as poorly as he did last year and things like that. But in addition to that, they have guys like, there's still that Fedotov situation in Russia. Mm-hmm. He just finished up his military requirement. Is that something that we hear about? Does he end up coming over? A year ago, he was supposed to be a part of the plan.
Right.
And then, craziness ensued. For
That's a whole separate conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know if we should travel down that path, but it's just
yeah. And listen, you've also got guys like Felix Sandstrom, right? He's also on that list. Yep. So it's like I said, it definitely makes that deal more palatable.
Sure.
But it's the kind of thing where it's like you do it and you swallow it, and you know that you're like you know that it's the right move, but at the same time, there's also this sinking feeling that like you send them somewhere, you send them to a team like who did I see? I saw Ottawa was in the mix, right? Montreal's in the mix. I know they wouldn't want to trade him within the division, but like it to me, it's all going to depend on what they get, the package that they get back. But I'm looking at they're going to trade this guy away, and it's going to be another guy that we add to the long list of guys that we couldn't develop or we couldn't take care of, and then they go somewhere else and be uberly successful.
Yeah, they flourish, and that's kind of been that's happened to the Flyers, I think. More times than I want to acknowledge, right? Yeah, and they put themselves, years ago, they put themselves in that position with Bob, like he's in the Cup final right now, contributing with Florida, a couple Vesna trophies later.
That's the guy that, like, man, did they swing and miss on that one.
Yeah.
Right. They put all their money, they put all their eggs in
Bryzgalov.
Briz is fucking humongous big things. And he was just a dude who just ended up being fucking bonkers and never amounted to anything.
And he turned out to be more of a he had some really successful years in Phoenix, but I think that there was he had played in a structure that I think was successful. Like the Yotes at that time were pretty good defensive teams, and I think that that pumped up Priz's numbers, and then he got that deal, from the Flyers in a desperate situation. But it was, you go through the decision making with the whole Bob thing, that really goes back a year prior to that, like before they even signed Briz, was the 2011 playoffs. Bob had struggled a little bit, and Laviolette kind of panicked at the time. They were getting beat pillar to post by the Bruins. I think the Bruins swept them in the second round. And the Flyers used musical chairs of goalies in that series. I think that changed the perspective of how people in the organization viewed Bob, who was young at the time. And I think it was Snyder at the time that it was like, I don't care what it costs, just fix this. I'm tired of this. Right.
Yeah.
And then in comes Bryzgalov on a 9-year, $50 million contract. So there's always a number of bad decisions that lead up to that,
100%.
Yeah.
100%. But listen, we're going to take a commercial break. We're going to come back. We'll talk a little bit of some draft prospects, and then we'll kind of wrap it up talking about a little bit of Stanley Cup hockey.
Yep.
So we'll be right back.
Von C. Brewing Company is a 20-barrel, 16,000 square foot microbrewery with a 2,500 square foot tasting room, including a spacious outside beer gardens in Norristown, PA, in the heart of Montgomery County. The Von C. family is part of the family that started C. Schmidt and Son Brewing in 1860. Stop in Wednesday through Sunday and taste a variety of draft and 16-ounce cans of originally brewed beer and tell them the Drunk on Broad crew sent you. Von C. Brewing is located at 1210 Stenbridge Street, Suite 300 in Norristown. Cheers.
Team Clicks are the only glasses for real sports fans. With interchangeable arms, you can support all of your favorite teams, or even make and create custom options as well. These die-hard sports fans have realized that sports fans needed something other than face paint to show their love and passion for their teams. Go to teamclicks.com/DOB and show your love for your hometown team.
La Tourain's curated collection of men's and women's watches is a perfect investment that lasts for years to come and fits perfectly with your every outfit and style. Our range of classic watches aren't just a great perfect formal and casual accessory, but a time machine that takes you back to memories. Explore our collection of timeless watches that can reflect your taste, personality, and personal style. Our exclusive collection of carefully curated, affordable luxury watches is what you need to make a personalized style statement. You can take pride in your prized possession, handing it over to the next generations as your most loved asset that they can also own and display with the same pride. These high-quality pieces stand the test of time, giving exceptional value and return on your investment. Go to la-tourain.com and use code DOB at checkout and get 10% off.
If you're looking for unique sports apparel, check out Streaker Sports. They've dug deep into the archives and have brought back some incredible defunct team logos and have even created entire defunct league collections. They also have collections paying homage to sports culture, including the Miracle on Ice, Slap Shot, Caddyshack, the Mighty Ducks, and even have a license with Wiffle Ball and USA Hockey. Only for Drunk on Broad listeners, use code BROAD at checkout to get 10% off anything at streakersports.com. Again, that's 10% off anything at streakersports.com with discount code BROAD.
All right, we're back. We left right before the commercial talking about some prospect conversations, right? So we're going to transition. The draft order for the NHL is set.
Yep.
The Blackhawks win the Connor Bedard sweepstakes, which, for me, it's not surprising, right? That they're gonna. I don't want to say it's orchestrated, but it does feel like they needed Connor Bedard to land in a really big hockey market.
Yeah. We should do a whole Drunk on Ice investigates on how that happened.
Man,
they just came out of the Taze Kane era, and now they
literally just moved on from those guys.
Yeah,
and now you're gonna I think the NHL saw the teams at the top of this draft and were like, this guy cannot end up in Anaheim, Columbus, San Jose, Arizona. To me, when I looked at the top, right, he was either going to end up in Chicago, Montreal, or Philadelphia.
Yeah, and it was funny because from a hockey perspective, just a hockey perspective, when you don't even consider the markets, Anaheim would be a great situation, I think, for Bedard to land in with Trevor Zegras there and Mason McTavish. They have some really good, exciting young players, and you drop Bedard in there, and all of a sudden, the Ducks become this really exciting young team. Right. I can't think of a team that would have needed him more than the Phoenix Coyotes. I mean, with the situation with the stadium, and even if you have to pick them up and move them somewhere, Bedard lands in a new market, I
heard that when I saw something floating around, Patrick Mahomes was talking about moving, buying the franchise and moving them to Kansas City.
That would have been incredible.
That's probably not the worst thing that could happen to that franchise.
Yeah, really.
But I feel like if he would have landed in in Anaheim, San Jose, right? As much as that might have made hockey sense, they would have gotten the Shohei Ohtani, Mike Trout treatment.
Sure.
They're playing on the West Coast, and those guys, as great as they are, you don't ever hear about them because the games are on. Obviously, right? They're not starting East Coast time. They're not starting until 10:30. Those are games where, unless you are dialed into hockey or you're a fan of that team, odds are you're probably only going to catch whatever highlights you go and seek out and consume.
Right.
But if you stick him in Chicago, He's going to be in that prime time. You know, that's a marquee franchise.
Sure.
And it's a way to get that franchise not even back on the map, but like keep them elevated at the top.
Yeah, they're I believe Chicago's like either the second or third largest media market in the country. So
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, I know Philadelphia's also up there. We're in the top 5, I believe. But yeah, I mean, in terms of like, it was a perfect storm for him to, you know, throw on that Chief Blackhawk uniform with the logo, and you know, and he's going to be. I mean,
I think they sold about $1 million in season tickets within 24 hours of that happening.
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt that. You know, and it's, you know, I mean, Chicago's, you know, they're a team that they put themselves in a really, like, they were all in on the Bedard thing. You want to talk about putting yourself in a position where you were, like super like awful for, you know, they were all in. They were all in on that. So, you know, and they'll get rewarded with Bedard, but you know, now becomes the hard part when you have to, like, you get the player, but now you got to actually start, like, the rubber meets the road, and you actually got to start like putting pieces around it and figuring out what works and what doesn't, and the right coach and things like that. So now it becomes the hard part, but you know, they did, you know, mission accomplished on the bad for Bedard train.
Jeez. Right. Now, and then, right, it shakes out, right? The Flyers pick kind of right exactly where we thought they were going to pick at 7.
Yep.
So it's like they're just outside of that group of that, like I know that this is a deep player draft, but like the talent and the top 4 players, the drop off after 4 is a little bit deeper, where it's like, if you had done this rebuild for this last season, and maybe you had brought in Tortorella this offseason, you may have, even if you weren't picking at 7, but if you're picking at 3 or 4 or 5, like you're still within earshot of those guys, where I feel like where they're picking now, they're like just on the outside. They're going to be like slowly watching the guys on the big board just like drop off, and they're going to be like, all right, we're going to take this guy, but this guy is like a guy who might not be NHL ready in the next year and a half. Like, it might be a guy that they're going to have to do more player development but this pick, I feel like, is probably the most important pick that they've had in a long time, because of where this franchise sits and where they need to really deepen the talent pool.
Yeah. Yeah. And it really just kind of matches up. It matches up perfectly for the Flyers, I think, like in terms of a lot of these players in the top 15 a lot of them are like high end, projected to be high end scoring line players, and the Flyers need high end talent. So especially at forward, and that's one thing. We had prior to the break, we talked about the Hart thing and all, and just aside with that, like with defense and stuff, like just so our listeners know, like it's defensive zone responsibilities on everybody. That's not just a defensive, just because you have
you're right,
defense in your name. I'm talking about forwards. The Flyers forwards don't always do their, you know, they don't always pick up their slack in the defensive zone. So I just want to make that a sidebar there that we were adding here. We're smarter than that on Drunk on Ice. I assure you that we know that hockey's a 5-man game, but it's you know, to go back to, like, you know, it matches up perfectly for them, and that's why this. And I've been on this for a little while, like on Twitter and things like that. That the Matavi-Michkov situation, how that plays out, because people are feeling as though he's going to fall in this draft due to the Russian conflict, and all the things that, you know, he's under contract in the KHL till 2026. So you're waiting 3 years, but we don't know, you know, if he's even allowed to come over. He says he wants to come over, but you know, after he plays a little bit at home.
But it is Russia.
Yeah, and there's that big issue there that is so much larger than hockey,
Right.
and but in terms of like offensive ability, offensive gifts, he rivals Connor Bedard in this draft, and I do think
Mm-hmm.
that like whoever ends up getting him, it's going to be like one of those. I believe it was the similar situation many moons ago with Jaromir Jagr, where teams weren't really sure, if he was going to come over. Pittsburgh takes the
Mm-hmm.
gamble. He comes over, goes on to be a essential part of their cup winning teams at Mario and all that.
Right.
And he was a franchise building block. The numbers that he's putting up at the age that he's at right now in the KHL
Just
is
wild.
incredible. It's on par with Ovechkin and Malkin. And you're
And
talking about
I'm glad you mentioned that name real quick. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
no, it's fine.
Michkov is not going to get past 8.
Yeah,
I'm convinced that the relationship that Ovechkin has
mhm.
and the ties back to the Russian
Oh right,
national
yeah,
team, right?
Washington's in the yeah.
I think that if he's there at 8,
Yeah,
there's already an international relationship and a
right.
hometown,
Yeah.
home country relationship that I feel like if he's there at 8, there's no way that Washington passes on him.
Yeah. And every team has to make that decision. Like in the
Right.
top 10, if you're picking in the top 10, you're going to have to weigh this Michkov thing. Because I mean, the talent level and the potential is so great.
Right.
And it's like it's potentially franchise altering. And I just I'm on board with it, but I totally understand people's hesitation. I've had conversations with people on Twitter, going back and forth, threads and threads of conversations
Mhm.
with people who don't feel like this is worth the risk, and I totally understand that. I think for the Flyers and this appetite that they like this multi-year process that they're going through,
Right.
I think where I'm at is that because it's a multi-year process, I have more of a risk appetite for like taking this kid and knowing that yeah, a lot of it's out of my control, but if he comes over, this could change our course pretty dramatically. So
And I think where their rebuild lines up, right? You
mhm,
know that if he's under contract and going to play, even if he plays in Russia until 26,
mhm,
that could be kind of a good situation because it could allow them to develop other players
mhm,
while he's still playing in Russia. And then when he's ready to come over, it could line up with where this franchise is kind of on the upswing, where
right,
they've got 3 more years of developing that talent pool. He's 3 years older, 3 years more mature,
mhm,
and it could be right. And what you said, it could be at that point inserting a franchise altering player while also having the talent pool within your farm system be a lot higher.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And like I said earlier, every team in the draft has to weigh this.
Right.
And if you're going to tell me, hey, I'm out on Michkov, I'm not dealing with that thing with Russia. That I don't want to deal with that. I totally get that.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
but I think I'm even more so invested. I was invested before, but this was now that the Provorov trade happened, and you add another first rounder this year. I think I'd be more willing to take the jump if I were the Flyers with Michkov, knowing
I
that I have
agree.
another first round pick in my back pocket later in the draft.
I agree. I
Yeah.
agree. So outside of Mishkov,
Mhm.
is there a guy? Is there another guy that you're looking at that could be in that availability in terms of at 7?
Yeah, I think Zach Benson's another one. I believe he's in
Mm-hmm.
Winnipeg in the WHL.
Right.
He's another player. I think that a little bit on the smaller side, but the compete level is off the charts. I could
Okay.
see him. I could see a player like him just absolute. I could see John Tortorella falling in love with a kid like that.
I got you.
Just complete, just just a complete dog, like just hardworking. He's a little bit on the undersized side, but I don't think that would be an issue when Danny Briere, who's one of the better undersized players, of the last however many years that he played. I don't think that would be an issue for Briere to take a kid that's a little bit on the smaller side.
Maybe someone that he identifies with a little bit.
Yeah, maybe a little bit like he could see a little bit of himself in that player. So Benson would be another one. I really like Debor Dvorsky. He's Slovak kid coming over. He's supposed to be projected to go in the top 10 as well. He's another centerman, and the Flyers do need, they need high end talent regardless, but I think they need centers. They need high end centers as well.
Yeah, no, I agree.
It's an important part of the, it's a important part of the ice. It's one of the most important positions in the game, and if you can have some guys with some high end scoring potential that play the middle, it accelerates things, I think, for you, and I think it's an easier transition for, I think, guys to natural centers to then pop out to wing versus a winger trying to convert a winger into. I know that's harder to say when you see what John Tortorella did with Noah Cates this year. He was a natural wing, turned him into a center, and he was outstanding for the Flyers this year. But I think that's more the exception than it is a rule. So they'll have a lot of options there at center, some of those guys that we just mentioned. But another player would be David Reinbacher. He's a defenseman. I think that he's been playing against men here the last year or so.
In Switzerland, correct?
In the National League, I believe, in Switzerland, and he's really talented. But his stock is kind of varied. I've seen stories where I believe it was the San Jose Sharks piece, and they said that they had the reporter talked to a scout or someone, a source close to the situation, and they had said that Reinbacher could go as high as 3 for them. That's how high they were on David Reinbacher. I don't think that's going to happen, but that goes to show that, the potential level there with Reinbacher. So we'll have to wait and see what happens there.
Hey, boys.
What's up, Mike?
What's going on?
Better late than never.
Time to bring in the closer, right?
Oh, my goodness. I've been running around like a lunatic. I'm sweating like a whore in church right now.
Oh, my God. So listen, we're on the prospect that you like for this draft kind of deal, right? So we talked a little bit about Michkov and, weighing the options for, if you take that chance, knowing that he might stay in Russia for the next couple of years, but that might line up with where you were at in your rebuild. Is there a guy that you're looking at that you like at 7?
If Michkov's there, I would do it. I think he's worth the wait. I think Kaprizov ish. They waited for Kaprizov over there in Minnesota. It's working for him now. If he's gone, I like Zach Benson a lot. He's obviously smaller, but he's got absolute wheels. He's dynamic. He's fast. He's a playmaker. He does a lot of flashy things offensively. I like Benson.
The guy that I wanted to talk about was Ryan Leonard.
Okay.
Because to look at just purely statistically, right? He's got a season this year where he scores 59 goals, playing on the U.S. development team. They're gonna need to hit on guys. Is the talent pool at the prospect level has to deepen in order for this rebuild to kind of get on track. Is that a guy that you look at? Yeah,
absolutely. Him and there's some other players there in the United States Developmental Program. Oliver Moore is projected to go there around that area. In that 7 to 10 range, I think. And another first rounder, projected first rounder is Gabe Perreault. And they're all part of that United States Developmental Program in addition with Leonard. Leonard's definitely somebody. I think his stock's just gotten like his stock's been raised rather, over the last year or so. He's another one you'd have to add him to that conversation there.
Mark, what do you think about Will Smith? I've seen him go anywhere as high as 3 or 4 and as low as 7, 8, 9. I can't get a read on where he's going in the draft.
I'm not sure. He's bounced around. I've seen that too.
Yeah.
There was a tournament. I can't remember what tournament it was. I saw him in one of the summertime tournaments, and for Team USA, I was watching the games on NHL Network, and he was clearly the most talented. Like, he was clearly one of the more talented players on the ice, but nothing really like stuck out about him. Like it's a summertime tournament, so it's hard to say as far as compete level. But like you mentioned, Don, like Ryan Leonard and Gabe Perreault were all over the place in that game that I watched. Right. Those games that I watched, and Smith was clearly like he was the quarterback on the power play and things like that. But I didn't see this just his skill set didn't jump out at me as much as a guy like maybe because like guys like Oliver Moore and all, they can like really fly, so they stick out to you more because they're like just jitterbugging all over the ice. Yeah. But Smith's an interesting one too, because I think his skill set actually matches what the Flyers would be looking for, playmaking type high-end centerman. Because they have guys that can shoot the puck. Like, I'm not really worried about, with Tippett and all those guys. They have guys that can Forrester, like those guys can really shoot it. So I would rather try to find some guys that can get them the puck, in those positions. So, but yeah, Smith's an interesting one too. I think the Habs may end up taking him.
Okay.
At 5. That's going to be my guess.
So, Mike, we talked a little bit earlier about the Carter Hart situation.
Okay.
Is there a scenario that you could envision where that trade happens before the draft?
Before the draft,
do they leverage everything and try to get up into that top?
Well, one thing I haven't really heard many people talk about, I'm sure you guys have, I don't think any Carter Hart deal is getting done before the Team Canada investigation is released. Once his name's cleared, I think that'll allow teams to kind of feel more comfortable in trading for him. I've heard, especially like Elliot Friedman has kind of said, pump the brakes on a Carter Hart trade. I just think teams are cautious right now, and I think the results of that investigation are going to get released after the final. It should happen before the draft, so maybe that'll speed things up. But yeah, I don't know. I still don't know if a Carter Hart trade is going to happen regardless. To be honest.
Yeah.
That
was one of the things we discussed earlier too, Mike, was walking him up to the big contract, big payday he's due next summer. Take another year to reassess maybe, and then look at it then.
The weird thing about a Carter Hart trade is there really is no precedent. I mean, there's a few trades here or there. I mean, do you want to go back to the Bobrovsky trade? I think it's a totally different scenario where Bobrovsky won it out. You have Brizgalov. There's really not a comparable. You go back to Freddie Anderson, maybe, and what'd that get you? I think a first-round pick, second-round pick, something like that.
Yeah.
There's really no precedent for a goalie 24 years old, in his prime or just entering his prime that's
making under $4 million.
Right.
Yeah.
So like those trades don't happen. So there's no precedent, and the goalies that you do see traded really aren't great hauls. So Danny Briere wants to hit a home run. You look at the Provorov return. I would think Carter Hart's going to fetch you more than that, I would assume. But do goalies trade, or do teams trade that much for a goalie? I don't know. Because goalies are voodoo. Like, they could just be great one year and not the next year for no reason. Take a look at Bobrovsky right now. Like, he's $10 million guy, and he's been awful some years, and he's won Vezinas. So,
yeah.
Jeez. Well, speaking of Stanley Cup. So, as it sits right now, Vegas has looked really impressive.
Yep.
I hate the fact that they have kind of hit the ground running as a franchise and been as successful as they've been, and we're still sitting here almost half a century later with no prospect of anything in sight.
Yeah. Vegas is they're a good team. They're a really good team.
They are.
And right on down. Like, I mean, like we were just talking about the goalies, and you look at like just the series in particular. Adin Hill hasn't really had to stand on his head or anything like that. He hasn't been like, I wouldn't say like, oh my God, like this is like, they don't win this without Adin Hill. I mean,
The
like,
paddle save was pretty crazy.
He did make a great
That
save
was
there. Yeah.
nuts.
Yeah. But he's stopping the puck when he needs to stop the puck. And just, I mean, there's been times in this series where like we talk a lot about like Florida's physicality and things like that. Chuck and Gudis and these guys, like Vegas got some guys that are really like biting down on the mouth guard in this thing, and like really like Ivan Barbashev's a free agent this summer. They acquired him at the deadline or close to it. I can't remember if that was a deadline day deal or not.
He's making a lot of money right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's gonna sign. Yeah.
Yeah, he's
Absolutely.
gonna get paid this summer with the way he's put 2 dudes a total gamer. Vegas got some guys like their fourth line's been effective in this series with Carrier and Keegan Kolsar. Those guys are throwing their weight around out there. But like there's been times in this series where like they just like raise their level, and they just like Florida just can't keep up with the pace of play that they set in this series. So
yeah, they're fast and big. I think Vegas has one player under 6 foot.
that's crazy.
It's nuts. It's nuts.
Yeah.
That is
And
nuts.
they're fast. And they have one thing they were missing their very first year during that Stanley Cup run. They didn't have a number one center. Now you have Jack Eichel, who's up for the Conn Smythe probably. One of 3, 4, 5 players you could possibly name for it. So
Yeah.
I mean, when I was watching them at home, like for those first 2 games when they're playing at home, right, and they are just outscoring them. Well, like they win the first game 1 5-2, the second game 7-2. Like they just don't look like there's anything in the way that can stop them. And I was actually really surprised when they lose game 3 in overtime.
I'm really happy that they won it overtime, because if Vegas won on that power play at the end of the third period, and like, how do you make that call in a Stanley Cup final game? I don't know.
And we take a look at like we get the benefit now, like this is in all sports, right? But like we get the benefit now, like with the broadcast and stuff. We get every angle.
Totally.
We got drone cameras. Yeah. Like there's all this stuff that we see. So you see it on replay, and you're like, game 42 of the season. That's probably a trip, right? Like they're calling that. Game 3 of the Stanley Cup final. I don't know.
With like 50 seconds left or whatever it happened with.
Yeah. And then
it gave me pangs of Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Like, how do you make that call in that moment
spot, right.
at that spot?
Yep.
Yeah, I always think of the Bill Clement thing too. Bill Clement used to say on broadcast, if you're a referee, you should always take like an extra second to look at the play, because you can't unblow the whistle. Once you blow the whistle, you can't just be like, oh, my bad, in the game 3 of the Stanley Cup final. It was a good move too. I mean, like that was Stevenson, right? I think he cut to the middle there.
Was it Stevenson? I don't remember who it was.
It may have been Chandler Stevenson that drew that call, but yeah, that was a tough call. That was a tough call in a game like that.
But I'm rooting for Florida. I hope they do it. It's a tall order, but like you said, I'm like they haven't had enough failures yet. Vegas. Like I've watched more Vegas Golden Knight final games than I have Flyers. You know what I mean? In my lifetime.
Not technically, Mike. That's reality.
Well, I say technically because I technically was alive during the '97 finals, but I was like 4 or 5 years old, so I don't remember that at all. So, I mean,
wow. It's wild though. It is. I mean, but they kind of had that mindset as that franchise was starting, right? You remember when they go through that expansion draft, they picked a lot of guys that were like seasoned, experienced guys, and kind of ate that contract stuff on the front end, which kind of just fast tracked their whole development as a franchise. And now they're that trade for you, Mike. You mentioned the trade for Jack Eichel, and now seeing what he's been able to do in terms of renewing the talent level and what he does to the guys that he's playing with, you're going to need a guy like that. If we're going to circle back to the Flyers, you're going to need a guy at the middle of this rebuild that is going to elevate the play of the guys on the ice.
Yeah, like I think with Eichel too, it's like big thing for him too is that he's finally healthy, right? Like he had that I believe it was his neck, wasn't it? Was it his neck
it was
or
neck? Yeah, it was the artificial disc replacement. Yep.
Yeah, that was I think that was like really what that put the end, that put the finishing touches on him in Buffalo. I think was he wanted to get that procedure done. I don't think
they told him no, basically.
Yeah, the Sabres weren't crazy about him getting that procedure, which like who's to say, right? Like I mean, but he's finally healthy now, and he gets to play with these are the best players he's played with in his career. Mark Stone's an excellent player, and they get to play with each other every night. So, and their defense too is really, really good, can skate, and they have experience. Alec Martinez won a cup with the Kings. He's got a penchant for big goals. Alex Pietrangelo number one D, all-purpose D. He's won cups, so they have experience too. They're a good team, man. They made their decision making out of the expansion draft. Like they really took those assets and there was really good player evaluation there as well. Plucking guys like William Karlsson out of Columbus, Jonathan Marchessault, like these guys, a lot of those guys from the original Misfits Vegas team.
Right. And they've never been afraid to make the bold move. Like you go out and trade for Mark Stone. You trade for, or you have Marc-Andre Fleury have a Vezina season and trade him for nothing. You sign Pietrangelo.
Yeah, so. It'll catch up to them eventually. They'll pay. They'll they've had some success here early, but I mean, in a hard salary cap league, you end up paying for it.
Yeah.
You end up paying for it either way. So we'll have to. But it makes it easier to digest, I think, if you've won a cup. You'll take those lean years after that.
For
sure.
Because at the end of the day, nobody's looking back and remembering the lean years, right? They're going back and you're looking at your Stanley Cup champion hat and your T-shirt and your pictures of the parade and nobody remembers the lean years.
No,
and I think they're on like the third coach already, right? Like it's crazy.
Wow.
Yeah.
What they did to Gallant was awful. Didn't they?
Who?
I think Gerald Gallant.
Yeah, yep.
They left him. They literally left him, I think. Like they were like he didn't make the charter flight and they're like, "Oh yeah, by the way, don't even worry about it. I'll flight go. You can go home."
Right. And he made the final like his first year there.
Yeah.
Wow. God,
they're ruthless.
Yep, they are.
You can't, as ruthless as they are, you can't argue with the success.
No.
I'd rather my GM be ruthless than like Chuck Fletcher, who was too nice. He got bullied on every deal. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And Mike, that trade that we talked about at the beginning, right? The philosophy in terms of how creative they had to be able to make that trade really gives me a good feeling about the deals going forward. That you're going to have to be, creative in a sense where like you look at the part of that deal where, the Kings are going to take on 30% of his salary. Just little things like that you're going to have to do in order to be able to rebuild this roster. I feel good about the direction because it's like you're kind of moving away from that. You're putting out to pasture the Broad Street bully kind of mentality and really looking at the players on the ice and how successful they're going to be. You have to put them in positions where they can be surrounded by guys that are talented to play right now.
Yeah, it's creativity we haven't really seen in a long time. Because the way I look at that trade, I'm sure you guys talked about it, is like the way I look at it is they traded Provorov for a first and second round pick, and all the other assets were basically thrown in for getting Peterson and Walker's contracts. Which Walker's contract I don't even think is that high. Mark, what's his contract off the top of your head?
He's making
like 2.25 or something like that. 2.5.
2.25, I believe. And he's actually pretty from all the things that I've gathered, he's actually pretty
serviceable. Yeah.
Yeah, he's useful.
Yeah.
So he'll help them a little bit. Maybe not to the degree that Provorov is helping them, but he'll help a little bit.
Yeah. So it's you squeeze extra assets out of taking on Peterson's contract, and yeah, I mean it's creative for sure.
Well, gentlemen, anything you want to touch on before we jump out of here? Anything we missed? Anything you want to talk about?
Well, my final thought was going to be the wildfires, but we talked about that at the top of the show.
Did you?
Yeah, like how crazy that was.
Final thoughts. Here we go.
Yeah, I mean that was going to be my final thought because I was just, I'm like, I'm reading about you have to put the recommending wearing a mask and stuff, which I don't have them anymore. I have gator mask,
right.
I don't have the actual thing, and I'm getting on the train every day, and I'm like, come on, Canada, figure this out. What the?
Yeah, I work outside all day.
You're hurting the world right now.
I'm in a truck all day. I'm outside all day, so I was outside the other day. I was actually wearing a mask outside for most of the day. Yeah,
I would have. I felt like crap, so I should have tried to find. But a lot of people on the train weren't wearing them. I was taking the train into the city, and not a lot of people were wearing them, but. Well, I would have if I had one.
The skies turned orange, which means the Flyers are back, I guess is kind of a good way to put that.
Well, listen, I think the irony in all that is right. We were wearing masks outside and then taking them off inside. Right. It just wow. The pictures that I was talking about at the beginning, Mike, the pictures out of New York
nuts.
We're just nuts. And then, to see how enveloped it was for as long as it was.
Yep.
It really does give you pause to be like, if you're not in a situation where you can close your doors and close your windows and turn the air conditioning on, some people didn't have the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, for sure.
And just thinking about that, just wild. But thankfully, the sky's blue, the clouds are out. Never been so thankful to see clouds in my in my life right now. But no, just. And someone sent me something the other day. There's an active volcano in Hawaii right now. So it's
Jesus.
The world's ending.
Before this apocalyptic ending happens, can we please get another parade somewhere? Somebody.
Right. Eagles are probably the best chance for that to happen.
That's right.
So
if you were to tell me, hey, the Flyers will win the cup, but then a volcano will take you all out, I'll probably take that.
You'll take that?
Yeah, I think I would take that.
Sign on the dotted line with your blood. There you go.
Sign me up. Sign me up. We're all going down.
Yeah.
Rich the other day was talking about it. He goes, "Yeah, man, we'll just broadcast our deaths. We'll just be live as it's ending.
Why not?
And end of the world show would be awesome.
Yeah.
Oh my god." So we gotta just make sure we hit upload, Mike, before we.
Before we go,
make sure it's.
Nobody's gonna be able to watch it, but
it'll be there though. Oh, gentlemen, well, this was fun. We'll definitely connect probably post draft and break down all the moves.
The one final thought I had was June 24th, Phillies Mets, the K-Lot tailgate.
Let's go
with Carter Hop Media. Who else? Drunk Phils fans, Bell Smashers Pod, a bunch of people are going to be there. It's going to be fun. June 24th. I think I'm going to get there around 11. I would talk to Rich, Don. He'll be there. He's going to ride with me
Rich
down.
Said you guys are going to carpool down?
Yep,
nice.
We are. So.
Yeah, we'll be there. Mark, you'll be there?
Yep, I'll be there. I'll be at the tailgate. And,
should be a ton of fun.
Hopefully we beat up on the Mets, right? They've lost 6 in a row or something like that.
Yeah,
seven in a row?
7 in a row. Yeah,
I love it.
Yeah, I'm ready. Ready to beat up on the Mets.
Nice. It's supposed to getting hot, so that's good.
Yeah.
Hey, listen, Kyle Schwarber. The Kyle Schwarber month actually start to hit. It's should be a good month. It'll be hot. Bats are gonna be swinging. So
I tweeted out this morning. June Schwarber is the greatest baseball player to ever live.
Well, did you see the statistics?
I did.
I saw the statistics this morning. Statistically, a better month than anybody in Major League Baseball history.
Wow.
Yeah, I saw it. I don't know if I can find it, but it is crazy.
Definitely nuts.
Yeah, that's got to be pretty common, right? Like
So,
for guys to pick their games up. Like for some reason I feel like A-Rod was like that. Like A-Rod could be awful
yeah.
through the colder months, but once it got hot, he got hot.
So at bat per home run ratio in MLB history. This is just June Schwarber, obviously. So Babe Ruth, number 30 at 11.76 at bats per home run. Mark McGwire is number 2, 10.61. Number 1, Kyle Schwarber, 9.56.
Oh my God.
Let's go.
That's him in the month of June.
He's number 2 because I'm discarding McGwire. So I got Schwarber up a notch. Just him and
Schwarber's 1.
Oh, Schwarber's 1. Okay.
Schwarber's 1.
Schwarber's
McGwire was
Oh,
2.
okay.
Yeah, I did that in reverse. So yeah, he's number.
Go to Wawa. Go to Wawa. Get your Schwarber drinks.
There you go.
It's all good. Well, gentlemen, we're gonna roll out, but we will definitely connect. Go check out all the stuff, all of our stuff online, all of our social media stuff. But we'll check in with y'all later.
Peace.
Sounds good. Thanks, Don.
This is the Broad Street Line, where Philly sports fans leave all of their sports hot takes. Call 267-405-3062 and show us your passion for Philly sports. Don't forget to tune in every Wednesday at 8:30 when we listen to your live reactions to the thrill of victory or the agony of defeat.